Hey, everybody, welcome back to the 5-8 podcast. Today we are diving into something pretty fascinating.
Okay.
Some really interesting perspectives on marriage, divorce, and singleness within the Christian faith.
Okay.
We will unpack the meaning behind 5-8 a bit later.
Okay.
It's powerful, ties into our topic.
Oh, right.
But first, let's head straight to Atlanta, Georgia,
Okay.
where Pastor Philip Anthony Mitchell of 2819 Church is about to tackle a passage he warns
Right.
could stir up some pretty deep emotions.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This sermon is definitely thought-provoking.
Okay.
Pastor Mitchell dives into Matthew 19.1 to 12.
Okay.
And right from the start, he acknowledges that this passage can touch on some sensitive nerves for folks in the congregation,
Interesting.
especially regarding their personal experiences and beliefs.
That's interesting. What is it about this specific passage that can make people feel uncomfortable or even upset?
Well, the passage deals with marriage, divorce, and singleness,
Right.
which are topics many people have strong feelings about, sometimes tied to personal struggles or past hurts.
Okay.
Pastor Mitchell seems to be very aware of that and approaches the topic with a lot of empathy.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So to understand this passage better, can you set the scene for us? What's the context of Jesus' teaching here?
Sure. So Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem teaching as he travels.
Okay.
He's drawing huge crowds, and there's a lot of buzz around him,
Okay.
especially because many people feel disillusioned with the religious establishment of the time.
Interesting.
And then, bam, enter the Pharisees,
Oh, cool.
who confront Jesus with a question designed to put him in a tricky spot. It's almost like a first-century version of online trolling.
Ooh, love it when things get a little controversial. So what's the loaded question they throw at Jesus? What are they hoping to achieve here?
They ask, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?
Wow.
And this is where the historical context gets really fascinating.
Okay.
At the time, there were different schools of thought on divorce within Jewish tradition.
I'm guessing this difference of opinion is what the Pharisees are trying to exploit, right?
Exactly. They knew there were these contrasting viewpoints, one very strict and the other more lenient.
Okay.
By pushing Jesus to take a side on this hot-button issue, they were hoping to create division and potentially discredit him no matter what he said.
So it was a classic damned if you do, damned if you don't situation.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And to understand their tactic fully, we need to look at their interpretation of Deuteronomy 24.1, which mentions a man divorcing his wife if then he finds no favor in his eyes.
Right.
The Pharisees were clinging to that phrase to justify divorce for incredibly minor reasons.
Yeah, seriously. What kind of reasons are we talking about here?
We're talking about things like burning dinner or simply finding someone else more attractive.
Oh, my goodness.
It really highlights how this interpretation was being used to justify a culture of disrespect for the marriage covenant.
That's just, wow. I can't even imagine living in a society like that where the stability of your marriage could be threatened by something so trivial.
It was definitely a precarious situation, particularly for women who had very few rights in that society.
Yeah.
Their security and well-being were entirely dependent on their husband's whims when it came to divorce. So this wasn't just the theoretical debate, it had real-life consequences for countless women.
It's sobering to think about the impact this must have had on their lives, living under that constant threat of being discarded for the slightest perceived offense. So how does Jesus navigate this carefully constructed trap? Does he side with either of the prevailing viewpoints?
He doesn't. Instead of getting caught in their attempt to force a black and white answer, Jesus masterfully redirects the conversation. He says to them, "Have you not read?" and takes them, and the listening crowd, back to the foundational principles of marriage found in the book of Genesis.
That's such a powerful move. It's like he's saying, hold on, let's not get lost in legalistic loopholes.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the source, to God's original design. I love that he doesn't shy away from addressing the issue head on, but does so by grounding his response in Scripture.
Yeah.
So what are these core principles of marriage that Jesus emphasizes? What does Genesis teach us about God's intention for this sacred union?
Well, he goes back to the very beginning, to the creation account, where God establishes marriage as a union between one man and one woman.
Right.
This union, Jesus reminds them, is designed by God to be permanent and unbreakable.
Okay.
He talks about leaving your parents, cleaving to your spouse, and becoming one flesh,
Right.
all pointing to the profound unity and intimacy that God intended within marriage.
That's fascinating. It really elevates marriage beyond a simple contract or social arrangement. It's a sacred covenant, a reflection of God's own nature and his love for humanity. I'm curious, though, how did the disciples react to all of this? This is pretty heavy stuff, even for those closest to Jesus.
You're absolutely right. Their response is actually pretty relatable, I think. They say, if that's the case, it's better not to marry.
It's like they're thinking, whoa, that's a lot of pressure. Maybe sticking to singleness is the easier route.
Exactly. But Jesus doesn't dismiss their concerns. He acknowledges that marriage isn't for everyone
Yeah.
and uses a rather striking metaphor to describe the different paths to singleness. The eunuch.
That's an interesting choice of words.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that metaphor for us?
Yeah.
What did Jesus mean by eunuch, and how does it relate to singleness?
So back then, eunuchs were often men who were castrated and served in royal courts.
Right.
They couldn't have children or traditional families.
Okay.
Jesus uses this term to represent three types of people: those born physically incapable of marriage, those made that way by others, and those who choose singleness for the sake of the kingdom of heaven.
So Jesus isn't just tolerating singleness. He's affirming it as a valid and potentially fulfilling calling.
Hmm.
What a powerful message, especially in today's world where there's so much pressure to get married and have kids. It's like he's saying, hey, there's another way, a path that can be equally meaningful and blessed.
It's a perspective that really challenges those societal pressures, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Jesus is highlighting that singleness isn't a lesser state or a sign of failure.
Right.
It's simply a different path, a different way of expressing love and fulfilling God's purpose for your life.
I find that really encouraging. It's a reminder that God has a unique plan for each of us, whether we're called to marriage, singleness, or something else entirely. And it brings us back to the heart of Pastor Mitchell's sermon,
Yeah,
which is really about recognizing the diverse ways God calls to love and be loved.
absolutely. And to create a culture of love and acceptance within the church.
Right.
A community where everyone feels seen, valued, and supported,
Yes.
no matter their relationship status. And this is where his call to action comes in.
Yes. Pastor Mitchell doesn't just leave us with a bunch of head knowledge. He challenges his congregation to put this truth into practice. It's about actively living out this message of honoring marriage, supporting those who are divorced, and encouraging those who are single.
It's about recognizing that everyone has a different journey and that God's grace extends to us all no matter where we are in life or what our relationship status is.
Right.
And speaking of God's grace, let's circle back to the meaning of 5:8.
Okay.
Remember that little teaser we gave at the beginning?
Yes. It's time for the big reveal. What does 5:8 refer to, and how does it connect to our conversation today?
It comes from Romans 5:8, a verse that beautifully captures the heart of the gospel.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. Lay it on us.
Romans 5:8 states, "But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us."
Wow, that's a powerful verse. It's just a profound reminder of God's unconditional love. It's not based on our performance, our relationship status, or anything else.
Yeah.
It's simply a gift freely given. But how does this tie into marriage, divorce, and singleness?
It highlights God's unwavering love and commitment to us even when we fall short. Just like in a marriage where both partners are imperfect and make mistakes, God's love never fails. He remains faithful even when we stray. And this applies to everyone, whether you're single, married, divorced, widowed, or somewhere in between.
So it's a reminder that we are loved and accepted by God no matter what. And that's a pretty amazing foundation to build our lives and relationships upon.
Exactly. It's a truth that frees us from the pressure to perform, the fear of rejection, and the weight of past mistakes. It empowers us to love others freely and authentically, reflecting the boundless love that God has shown us.
It's amazing how this one passage in Matthew can spark so much insightful conversation about God's design for relationships and his unwavering love for us.
It really speaks to the power of Scripture, doesn't it? It's a living word that continues to challenge and inspire us, prompting us to dig deeper and discover new layers of meaning within its pages.
Speaking of digging deeper, you know what really resonated with me? Pastor Mitchell's emphasis on not just understanding these concepts, but actually living them out. He challenged his congregation to be intentional about supporting people in all stages of their relationship journeys.
I agree. It's not just about absorbing information, it's about embodying that truth in our interactions with others. He urged his congregation to honor and celebrate marriage, to offer support and grace to those who are divorced, and to encourage and affirm those who are single.
It's like he's saying, okay, we've unpacked the theology now, let's put it into action. Let's create a culture of love and acceptance within the church, recognizing that everyone has a different path and that we all need each other's support.
And that message of love and support extends beyond the church walls, doesn't it? It's a call to reflect God's love in all our relationships, to practice empathy and compassion, and to be a source of strength and encouragement for those around us.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening who are single and seeking a partner who shares your faith, we want to remind you of a fantastic resource, savedsoulmate.com.
It's a platform dedicated to connecting like-minded individuals who are looking for love and companionship rooted in a shared commitment to Christ.
It's a wonderful way to meet people who share your values and your desire to build a relationship that honors God. So whether you're navigating the joys and challenges of marriage, healing from the pain of divorce, or embracing the unique gifts of singleness, remember this: you are loved by God unconditionally and eternally.
And that love is the most powerful force in the universe, capable of transforming lives and relationships in ways we can't even imagine.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the complexities and beauty of relationships. We hope you found it encouraging and thought-provoking.
And remember, no matter where you are on your journey, God's grace is sufficient for you. His love never fails.
Thanks for listening to the 5-8 Podcast.